To cover the structure with fondant or Malin chocolate, the first thing I've done is covered the waterfall and the sides with a darker color fondant. And I've rolled it really thin. See that? All you want to do is cover up the white. You're not looking for smoothness or perfect squares or perfect angles. You're just wanting to eliminate the white from the design. So you can see it's not perfect. It's okay. I found a French fry cutter, and it's a 1/2 inch. And this would work for like if you were doing blocks or you're doing Rubik's cubes. You can just find a cutter that's going to be the right dimension. And what I did is I cut not all the way through, but just enough to indent the block or the square. When I start designing this, I'm not going to cut every one of those squares out. I'm going to do maybe 3, maybe 7, maybe 2, maybe just different pixels that's going to fit across here. And then you want to be able to line up, you can see they're different colors, the little blocks all the way across. And I think I made 3 variegated colors. It's very stiff. So when I use my X-Acto blade, I can cut a straight blade right down the center. And you can really gauge how many of these you're going to need by just going 1, 2, 3, 4. Makes it easier. You just don't want them to be too thin, because it's not going to emboss. Got it rolled out and it'll emboss all little blocks and squares. You're good to go. Also, when I'm going to be designing this, I've taken into account that I'm going to need some little squares. And I just did these quickly last night just for an experiment. Put them in the freezer and basically just froze them, because the 1/2 inch ice cube tray that I have, it's not flexible. It's just like you got to really twist it and get your muscle into it. So if that happens, just get a little knife, straight edge, and kind of do that, pick it up. Since it's frozen, it won't mess up the fondant or the Malin chocolate. And I'm going to gauge the figurines on this one little guy. I don't think this is Steve. I think it's one of Steve's friends. And I think maybe this is the height that I'm going to do the figurines. As you can see, yeah, these are pretty stiff. That's the stiffness that you want to be able to go back and get perfect squares along the edges. I finished the water and the waterfall, and I'm working on the area that goes around the waterfall underneath. I've cut out 3 different colors of fondant, and how I did this, I started with a darker color, and then I put white, and then I added more white. So you start with the same base of color and just whiten it by using fondant or gum paste. If you watch a lot of my videos, you know one of the things I do before I finish a project is I always paint. And the main reason why I add color to the fondant is because once it dries, it becomes to looking a little bit dull. And if you add color, when you steam it, it's going to look so much more professional than if you just added the fondant to a project. Here I have used cinnamon, tree bark, and dark chocolate. And how I added color, I just color dusted it onto the square once it's dry. And what this does too is it gets in the creases and it gives it a little bit more definition. There. You don't want to add a lot of color. Just a little, just to make sure that you get it in the creases there. Okay. And color dust is a lot of fun to have. You can have a piece that may be too light, and you add a little bit of color dust to it, and you can darken it. I've finished the cake board, and from this point on, you could use this for a cake. Put the name, candles, wherever you wanted on the board. But for me, this is the fun part. I also want to point out that if you're trimming around the edges, use a little quilting pin to keep things in place. Makes it so much easier, so when it dries, you have a more conformed edging around the cake. And you always want to trim out the cake. You don't want to have rough edges. And here I've added a little bit of grass because the cake is going to sit on top. And I've also added fondant. And you don't have to do that. You can leave the board white. One of the reasons why I put all on top was because I wanted to connect this piece here. And then if I had to transport the cake without it being already assembled, if there are guests there, it's going to look really nice. And I'm really a lot about presentation. All right, so I want to point out the Rice Krispies that I'm going to be doing. And I have 3 cutters, which I'm going to be using. This one is an inch, this one is like 1 1/4 inches, and this is one 1.5 inches. I want to point out how I'm going to do the squares or the blocks for decorating the cake. I've cut out Rice Krispies for the large one here. And the squares that we had cut out, they're still flexible, but you can't indent them and mess them up. I'm going to attach it with piping gel because it's still sticky. Line them up, make sure the squares are lined up. And then take another one, take piping gel, and make square blocks. And the reason why I've chosen this is, again, here's little Steve friend. You want him to be able to land on the blocks. But you don't want the blocks to be so large that they just dominate the creativity of the cake. So I'm choosing this one. I may be using these if I have to do a square to go in between. You can, like I said, you can leave the cake board as is and put your cake on top, or you can have fun and add a bunch of decorations. I also wanted to point out about the blocks. It may be difficult for you to get them out, but I have found that if you leave them into the container overnight, they're a lot easier to remove. And if you have one side that is slightly damaged, well then put it toward the back so no one can see it. I have this tool here. I've never seen another sugar artist use it, but I'm really big into clay tutorials. And what this tool is, if you go and get a manicure and you get fancy little designs on your nails, this is what they use. And what you would do is just take the tip of here, put it into your paint, and just dot it on, just like an impressionist art. And then once you have it where you like it, well then you can allow it to dry. I wanted to take this opportunity to show you how to do lettering for a cake. It's simple. You do not need to go and buy large cookie cutters or lettering. And it's exactly how I do almost every one of my designs. I cut out a pattern. And here what I've done, since my grandson's name is Mason, I have Xeroxed it to the size that I want it to fit onto the cake. And I cut each of the letters out with an X-Acto blade. One thing you want to make sure when you're doing lettering is to let it dry. When I first began my sugar art journey, I would watch videos and I'd watch figurines and I'd watch them put them together, and I never had the concept that there is editing going on in the video and they're allowing parts of it to dry. So you want to make sure that if you're doing the squares, which I have here, the little creeper that I'm working on, you want to make sure that you allow it to dry. It's a lot easier to work with, and you have a lot of time to put your support in the figurines, because it takes probably a day or two for the fondant with the gum paste to dry. The drier the fondant is before you begin cutting, it's going to make it easier. And all you need to do is put a little bit of shortening or spray some cooking spray on the back, and just press it down into the fondant, and it'll stay there while you cut out the lettering. You will also notice that once the photos come out, that the water looks shiny, and all that I've done is brushed piping gel onto the blue. You're going to want to let the piping gel dry overnight at least, because you don't want it to be sticky. And if you're pressed for time, mix the piping gel with a little bit of water. That'll help it to dry a bit.